One evening, as was her habit, Edith asked me if I had any predictions for the coming year. In response, I mentioned what I thought might happen, as I did at my weekly group meetings. I was often asked the same, and my answers were always based upon my ardent wish for the entire human race. Peace. My thoughts are always based on the importance of people being genuinely optimistic and more positive, for I want to see a happier world. I want to see humanity living without strife, enmity, and hurt to one another. A humanity living in peace, harmony, and unity. Maybe I am an everlasting idealist, but then again, why should it not be possible? I did not need to be a fortune teller to suggest things like that, yet there have been people hoping I would predict and talk about more drastic issues, such as climate change, or meteors colliding with Earth, the end of the world, and more doom and gloom. I prefer to fill my world with nicer thoughts and constructive ideas that the whole of humanity can benefit from. I endeavor to tell my audience that the wars and discordance humans have created throughout their arduous history could be dealt with once they start thinking positively. That may mean giving up their cult-based beliefs. Alas, the world seems to be saturated with hatred, jealousies, and revenge. However, if common sense prevailed, people accepting each other as one human family, everybody concerned about the welfare of one another, without any religious dogma, for it has proved to be the destroyer of peace, in the name of some mythological supreme being, they would be able to see the light at the end of the tunnel. If people would only get together amicably and talk about their differences, they would realize that all their war efforts and resultant sufferings are futile. Desirous to see positive and beautiful things in others, I avoid talking about the falsehoods, separations, racially motivated hatred, religious fantasies, and fears the world seems to display. When you read my statements, you soon discover that they are only an observation regarding my personal experiences and struggles to find solutions to the unfortunate circumstances which engulfed me in the past. However, if and when a disaster is likely to happen, and I can sense it through my own observations and feelings, I'm always ready to inform others without lecturing them. Over the years, I have been warning my close associates and friends about the need for them to reduce their habits of smoking until they were able to stop altogether, as I could see where they were heading with their health. Some did not take me very seriously, but soon discovered how right I was, although their well-being was of utmost importance to me. Since my childhood, I have developed a sense of feeling the earth move, particularly when standing in front of the rising or setting sun. Similarly, I developed a sense of hearing the sounds of the earth under my feet, especially when standing by the seashore or on a farm in the middle of the night. By listening to the deepening sounds of a constant noise, I know there is something not in order. By listening to sounds of such a constant rumble, I can predict earth tremors or major earthquakes. You might think that I'm probably dreaming about that also, but of course you are, as always, free to choose. When visiting friends in Ankara and elsewhere, I used to tell them to duck or hide under tables when I felt the necessity. Those who did not believe or laughed at me soon discovered why I did so. Some even asked me how I knew what was to happen. Others claimed that I must be psychic, yet I have never claimed who bragged about being what they thought of me. When I was near a volcano, after hearing specific rumbles coming from the depths of the earth, I was able to tell them when an eruption was likely to occur. I always believed that we, all of us, had the ability to hear those rumbles. However, in our modern and practical world, many of us have distanced ourselves from the reality of certain feelings and sensations which are an integral part of being a human. Thankfully, our animals are still capable of sensing and hearing things we seem to deny. Some of us are influenced to dismiss those natural sensations as being our childhood fantasies. Children are particularly good at sensing all kinds of things within their colorful worlds, but are often ignored as if they are just imagining things. Remember, whatever can be imagined, some truth can be found in it, for imagination is real. When Edita asked me to predict something about a week before a major worldwide event took place, while looking at a map of the Philippines, I told her about a mountain with a strange name starting with the letter P, which was likely to erupt, but I did not know why I said that. I also told her that it was probably an ancient volcano. She looked at me as if to ask how I knew. Even perhaps not really believing. She said, "We have many volcanoes, and most of them have remained inactive for a long time." Then she showed me pictures of an asymmetrical volcano and explained that it was my own volcano, and more than 2,400 meters above Legazpi in South Luzon. There could be one other, she added, but it has been asleep some hundreds of years, so it could not be the one either. It is called Pinatubo. I told her it was unclear to me why I thought of the letter P. However, if we could take it as a prediction, she must notify her relatives living nearby. She was unsure how to relay a message like that to her brother. I suggested telling him that it was in Suren's dream. It could be real. Remember, people accept dreams and imaginings as more real than actual facts. I was not going to deny my ability to clearly hear the strong rumbles from the depths of the earth, and pondered whether there was any valid evidence in predicting a local tremor. However, the volcano I was concentrating on was far away from where I lived. Probably I was inspired. To put my theory to the test, I suggested Edita urge her relatives to move out from there for a few days, hoping they would listen to her. I believe she spoke about it to her brother, Tony, and they all had the same opinion as Edita had originally suggested. Some people she knew were living in Baguio and others nearby villages. However, they have all taken that alleged prediction lightly, perhaps like a joke. I could not dwell on that issue for long, and yet hoped that I had not wasted my time warning them. It was impossible to explain to her some of the things I was capable of doing, and remember, she preferred to think of the whole prediction as a psychic endeavor. My ex-wife and her faithful brothers would respond to such a prediction with extreme fear and trepidation, and claim it to be demonic activity. Edita showed me photographs of a volcano which showed lava spewing from its top. It looked stunning, and I have copied them, but she insisted Pinatubo was definitely not the one. A week later, the whole world was talking about Mount Pinatubo, which had erupted and spewed lava and ash all over the area. The ash cloud it produced in the atmosphere covered much of the earth as it circled the globe. It could also be seen from space and was photographed. There was no human loss, but it caused health problems and economic disaster as It covered the land and nearby villages, as well as some rice fields with thickly laid fine pumice. Those who had originally heard this prediction were really astounded, but Editha, for some strange reason, kept silent. In fact, she completely ignored it afterwards. Perhaps she was shocked, or could not digest it. She might have been disturbed that somebody else was more knowledgeable than herself. Even if I considered this as only a theory, I knew I was to discover the real motive behind her uniqueness later. If you ask me why I made such a prediction in the first place, it was because I felt obliged to do so, and considering the rumbles I felt, I uttered what first came to mind, and strangely enough, I did not take it very seriously at the time either. But it shocked me when it actually happened. I doubted if I was hearing them from such a long distance, and it may have been a coincidence, but then again, maybe not. I really wished I could visit those islands to see the volcanoes for myself and help people if I could, or just console them. This wish alone was strange, for normally people would avoid going into danger zones. I still do not know why I wanted to do so. I again encouraged my group to think positively with the aim of spreading a thought of peace around the world. We were attempting to discover if mind over matter really worked. If one could prove it to be true, we would know for sure that thoughts could influence molecules and therefore objects. I remember when my brother and I used to blow into the air, and amazingly, every time we did so, a cool breeze or mini storm caused the trees to sway. We know that some human ailments can be assisted for the better, remembering that perception is the reality, and if one believes in something, it may become real. However, Margaret's negative input about me continued with Malek and Edgar from time to time, and also whenever she was in Melbourne, attending those gatherings which were under my directive. Malek and her friends began to question me, my integrity as a friend, my sincerity, and my morals, while trying not to make it too obvious. Margaret has certainly not been a positive influence. I felt even then that they wanted to stop the group, but at the insistence of others, we continued. Now they were advising me to get married to Margaret, saying that she was the best match, although I had repeatedly explained that we hardly knew each other, meeting her in my Perth studio for the first time when she visited Western Australia, and whenever we met, she only spoke about her work-related disappointments and romantic fantasies. When I visited Sydney and met her, we never spoke about anything positive, other than her own traumas. We did not know each other in any other way. I had a very strong feeling that their Sai Baba-related group leader was still not very happy about my input, and apparently did not want to lose his group to philosophy and science. Besides, it was a source of income for him. Margaret, who loved to stay at ashrams, felt more at home with them, for she adored Sai Baba. As mentioned, that other gentlemen preferred his kind of meditations for a fee over my voluntary activities, during which I utilized positive visualization techniques. It was also then that one of the members attending my group recommended for the first time that I visit Muriel's group in Springvale, which was not far from where I lived. I was told that they had regular guests lecturing on a variety of specifically chosen subjects, New Age and spiritual. Who knew what interesting people one would meet there? Learning a few new things, and even perhaps finding feasible answers to some of our age-old questions. It sounded very positive, and I decided to contact them sometime soon. At Melek and Edgar's, only decision-maker, however, was Melek. Probably encouraged by Edgar and members of the group, Melek wanted to continue with the program I presented for a while, but there was a chill in the air between her and me, especially after her verbalized concerns in regard to poor darling Margaret. If there was any chance of me being involved with Margaret, as Melek was demanding at every opportunity, she would probably feel happier to associate with me as the group leader. I failed to understand why even that aspect of my life needed to be designed and controlled by other people. Although I responded to her regarding how I felt about Margaret, and that we did not know each other well, completely opposite to each other's interests, she was adamant in her resolve. Whatever I said fell on deaf ears. Who knows what Margaret was feeding them with? Perhaps her being a Sai Baba devotee was enough for Melek to think the way she did. She looked totally uninterested in what I explained and was almost angry with me. Edgar, however, realized that what I explained was a truth statement, and her assumptions about what was right for me were not correct. Melek appeared to be disappointed. After all her supposed kindness and caring nature towards her friends, even her notable advice for me to marry Margaret, it seemed that I was expected to follow it through. It felt as if I had been ordered to do so, and apparently I was expected to dance to every tune they played. I experienced precisely the same feelings when sharing a room with the Strohbachs a long time ago in Germany, and soon after with my ex-wife for a very long time. Margaret, too, had similar attitudes in commanding and demanding. It might have been greatly fulfilling just for one person, but at what cost to my completely undermined and ignored needs? I was unsure what damage Margaret had caused, and to what extent. On the other hand, did they really appreciate me? Did they really value my time and effort? According to Melek, Margaret was a darling woman who cared for me, whereas according to Edgar, there seemed to be something not quite right with that darling woman. He advised Melek that it would be far better to listen to both sides of the story. These kinds of demands therefore helped me to decide to have absolutely no connection with Margaret and the like for at least a long while of forever. Margaret's obsessive and tragically possessive nature, desirous to be always correct in regard to someone like me, needing to take all the blame for those alleged sins not committed, completely turned me off. Edita, on the other hand, told me about her desire to visit the Philippines, her brother, and other friends very soon. I was certainly very keen to have a break from my unending traumas and visit that country, once again conducting research and documenting it. Doing so in their major cities and townships, studying the traditions of the colorful locals, and producing a video documentary would be the delightful change I needed. When I spent time in the Philippines previously, I had been involved with their university system, and therefore had very little time to see and discover more about their lifestyles. This time, for example, I wanted to see how their faith healers scored. I was going to be a freelancing guest researcher, but perhaps acting like a tourist. I could travel with Edita and stay with her brother and his family for a while, as such a suggestion had already been made. In fact, they wanted to visit places where those faith healers could be seen, discovering the origins of alleged miracles like those blood and oil-crying statues, and the miraculous appearances of Jesus and Mother Mary in the skies. I was going to remain completely impartial and neutral in my endeavors. Tony was a devout Catholic and very religious, while also being keenly interested in ancient church buildings and cathedrals. Their architectural designs have always fascinated me as well. He was interested photographing them wherever he went. He was a well-respected attorney and scholar at law. According to Edita, his family was not allowing him any room to breathe and have peace, accusing him of being disloyal. He was happy and very excited to get to know me as a scholarly friend and as his sister's companion. I was not sure what Edita had told him about me, but was certain that I was presented as if being totally in love with her. It would not be wrong to be considered like this if circumstances were more favorable. However, I did not know her, and certain characteristics of her still needed to be further unearthed, as I had no intention of stepping on ice. I also knew that she had been thinking about us being soulmates. Even if this might have been the reality, I still needed to get to know her better. She had romantic dreams, for she grew up in a society influenced by Spanish Romanticism, and when younger had been writing poems to an imagined lover, whilst also collecting poetic expressions on aspects of love. She reflected her teenage ideals in her writings, even though many years had passed. She was disillusioned in love after all those decades, but as she often exclaimed, the spark in her heart remained alive. Like many of us, she had her heartaches and disappointments. Like many of us, she wanted to recapture those wonderful romantic feelings, until she discovered how impossible to achieve that level of happiness was. After all those years, the spark never disappears. The dream still remains, no matter how impossible fulfillment may be. From our teenage years, we all seem to experience life's hidden tragedies and unexpected disappointments. I also had my share of this, but the question remains, what are we doing about it? Do we need to put ourselves into a dull coma? Can we make life work to our advantage so that we can become wiser as we mature? I can understand other people's trends and expressions, no matter how sophisticated or simplistic they are. I had a few disappointments and often found myself in the oblivion, but right now I was extremely anxious about my current existence and not interested in any romantic involvement. I was not fully recovered from my own traumatic experiences, which had nearly destroyed me. Falling in love might perhaps help me, as some friends propounded, but the possibility of ending up in absolute misery due to unknown elements would be devastating. Being influenced to live in fear under the pressure of some religious darkness for a long while during one's younger days, forced to think of everything in the world being evil, full of hatred, projected from the very hearts of those so-called faithful, was very hard to shake off. It was going to take a long time to recover, although one may think that one is probably immune to such conditions. In my case, I believed that my past had no effect on my person any longer, but the fear remained hidden until I faced the prospect of seeing a different light. Having been liberated from such dull and one-track mindedness I was subjected to allow the light to shine again, and the pieces of the complex puzzle of life started to come together. One could now see how manipulative those so-called faithful ones were. Those I had been introduced to by my cousins have indeed tried hard to suppress every freedom the young needed in order to learn and grow strong, to mature and succeed in life. They wanted to control my every move and every thought, but I remained stubborn, thus helping me survive the ordeal. I used the opportunity to my advantage, thanks to my invisible childhood friend. However, having associated with those faithful ones during my marriage had a bad influence upon my being, and it remained hidden until I was reawakened to the evidence of life, possibly love and romance. Such experiences also rendered me into someone who became overly cautious. Because of my outlook, people assumed and remarked that I was extraordinarily mature and wise for a child. Maybe I was. Maybe it was just my own aware self. Maybe I was one of the clever children and an intelligent youth for my age. But I did not have the capacity to decide on my actions like fully grown and mature people. When I was a teenager, my friend had been a great help in making wise choices. I knew it was unbelievable for the practically minded, but to me it was my reality. In truth, I was left completely without any guidance, and I believe my brother was the same, apart from our dear mother's input. Indeed, a boy's closest and genuinely the very first best friend is his mother. Therefore, any disappointments or happiness experienced by that best friend would also have a lasting effect on the young. Our mother was not under the influence of religious dogma. I am very grateful for that. She was a highly intelligent woman, and often very philosophical. She was capable of training herself, finding ways to survive beyond her means, although at times she presented a tendency towards being naive. Some of her trends were passed on to my brother and me. Realizing that one could survive in all circumstances and be inventive. However, a little help from others would make things easier. I cannot deny the fact that I was completely alone and have been the one helping many others. Through my own experiences, I learned to make comparisons at a very early age and comprehend the complex issues people presented. The subjects I studied during my youth and later practiced had some forbearing. In Edita's case, having grown up in the beautiful Philippines, she would love to have rekindled her teenage fantasies and romance. However, I was extremely fearful to start anything like that. I was fearful of starting a brand new romantic affair because I was badly hurt. Repeating myself, I will say that we did not know each other well, and I could not pretend that we had known each other long before, unless, of course, one could imagine that we lived before, somewhere else, in our former incarnation, and were somehow familiar with each other, as she constantly claimed. Such a thought may be unnecessary if we could accept that all of us are somewhat united, perhaps considering that unity as an aspect of the universal consciousness we all share. Maybe that is what makes us feel familiar to each other. Falling in love, as we all discovered, or still are discovering, is a very serious and responsible experience. We feel fulfilled and complete when we are in love. When it is no longer felt, we seem to fall apart. It is very hard to find answers to why this is so. When I met Edita, the way it happened, I felt lacking in love due to my emotional nature being almost completely destroyed. I felt frozen somewhere in time in a deserted place. I felt lost, as if having fallen into a mud pool, trying to swim towards solid ground unsuccessfully. Certainly things could become more favorable, but some aspects of her characteristics, influenced through the years, and her hidden personal experiences were not going to make things easy. My disappointments and expectations would not help either. She loved being listened to. However, listening to others was a different matter. I could not fall in love without knowing the other reasonably well, and physical attributes alone could not determine the outcome for lasting love. Without acceptance of every aspect of the other, one could not truly fall in love, except perhaps only in one's dreams. When prospective partners start knowingly or unknowingly placing hindrances to each other's progress and begin lecturing about the weaknesses they display instead of dwelling more on the positive attributes, that love is bound to remain a fantasy. Selfishness, in the form of as long as I have all the comfort, care and love, cannot paint a beautiful tableau to be enjoyed by both parties. I had been discreetly told by Edita's friends and associates that she was a good woman, needing my utmost love and care, for she was badly hurt by the man she was previously married to. They never asked me about my past and my needs. In fact, they never desired to listen to me, only advising me to marry her. It was exactly the same with Melek, demanding that I marry Margaret. They might have known what kind of person I was, perhaps psychically, perhaps even in their dreams. I was also advising them about the need to get to know each other better first. The word marriage was no longer appealing to me, for it always seemed to be associated with unnecessary disappointments, accusations, hatred, abductions, religious intolerance, anger, fear, and uncertainties. I could not explain to them about how I felt, knowing they all had to be right, and I could never be correct, even when I was. However, I appreciated their concerns, for it was obvious that they cared for their friend, who followed their beliefs. It pleases me immensely to see people caring for one another, but they never considered how I felt. In 1993, I visited the Philippines with Edita and Robert. But she needed to return home a little earlier than me. She was keen to introduce me to her brother, as she might have thought that when intellectual people met, there would always be an immediate bond as friends. However, I felt that she wanted him to assess me about my suitability for a continued friendship with her, or even marriage, but I was not certain. She also wanted me to meet her mother in Pangasinan, and I was very curious to meet her. Some time ago, Edita had shown me the only photograph of her mother amidst a group of pigs. She was a pig farmer, and was apparently very concerned about her daughter, but for some reason Edita spoke little of her mother and avoided talking anything important about her, probably feeling embarrassed. She was going to fly over with Robert a little earlier than me, and I was to organize a few things, such as temporary accommodation for the cats during our absence. Shortly after, I took an international flight to Manila to be met at the airport. However, when I go to places and meet people I have not met before, I like to give them a little thank you gift, and was advised the best gift, which would really be appreciated in the Philippines, was some meat, preferably Australian beef, lamb, and a few other things. They needed to be thoroughly frozen, well wrapped in plastic and foil. The butchers I usually shopped at, they would do it for a small fee, and the food would remain frozen until its final destination. I was looking forward to seeing the surprise and excitement in the eyes of people when they shared the food. According to information, meat was very expensive in the Philippines, and so hopefully my gift offering would be appreciated. I took some other food items as well, such as breakfast cereals and chocolate. Bringing in certain food into Australia is not permissible, but like a few other countries, the Philippines welcomed the idea. As mentioned, I had previously visited the country a while ago for a different reason. However, this time I was going to stay in the Philippines I was partially familiar with as a curious tourist. I packed the necessities, food items, and film equipment, although I always preferred to travel as light as possible. It proved a great and practical idea to send some articles to the airport before my flight. I was told the reason why Edita and Robert traveled ahead of me was because of his schooling after the holidays. This gave me time to check on how Reg was doing with his health, and discovered him to be his usual self, his jovial nature apparent, but needed to have a few more urgent medical tests. He prepared his usual strong espresso and spoke about his forthcoming appointments, treating it all like a joke. Then I contacted Malak and Edgar about my flight schedule, Edgar telling me he had spoken to his sausage, which was a term he used when conversing with his wife for a light-hearted jest. If I wanted to, I could stay at their home, ready for the next morning's early flight. After all, he said, if you traveled from Chelsea Heights, it would cost you more. What a change of heart it was. Although unwilling at first, due to expected advice from Malak, I remained with Edgar's suggestion, as it was going to make things a lot easier. I had only taken what I was going to carry in the plane. I appreciated Edgar's concern, but at the same time was extremely fearful about Malak's need to advise me, yet again to consider marrying Margaret. That was enough to spoil the excitement, but I chose to keep calm and reserved, telling her, repeating several times over, that I was going to think about it. I just wanted to have some peace from those unwanted and unwarranted lectures I did not need to listen to. As per Edgar's advice, I walked to a phone booth near the station so that he could pick me up with my heavy luggage. While dialing their number, a very strange and frightening thing happened. There was suddenly a very loud bang, as if the phone booth had exploded. I was shaken as I stood inside the tiny area, wondering what had just happened, and noticed that the entire glass walls of the cabinet had pulverized into finest sand, and the metal frames were buckled. I hoped people did not think I was attempting to explode myself as some suicide bombers do in the name of their belief. Then I pondered that perhaps certain unfamiliar energies around me had caused it. Did I perchance possess some high energy levels, which the elements the phone booth was made of did not have a chance to withstand? A middle-aged couple, having noticed what happened, approached me with some apprehension to see if I needed any help, but I was perfectly fine, and well protected. There were no cuts and bruises on my physique. They said that they had never seen anything like this before, and were worried that somebody might have wanted to harm me. I tried the now partly damaged phone to dial Edgar's number, although the earpiece was missing. While people called the police, Edgar heard what I said over the mouthpiece and arrived to pick me up. I told him what had happened, but during the commotion he did not take any note of it, just helping me put my hand luggage in the car, while asking me where the rest of the luggage was. On arrival at their place, I explained that the rest was already at the airport, yet when speaking of the telephone booth incident, both he and his wife did not take any notice of what I said. Remembering my daughter's attitude, I thought I had probably been shot at by somebody who hated me. I was once again concerned with the thought of how vindictive some Jehovah's Witnesses could be, and how my lovely daughters attempted to harm me even when they were very young. Since I could not get through to Malek and Edgar regarding what had just happened, I remained silent. They might have thought I was talking gibberish due to my excitement about going to the Philippines. It was when Malek told me that perhaps I was so excited about the prospect of tomorrow morning's flight, I had probably experienced an adrenaline rush and was imagining things. So I should have an early night in their guest bedroom with a huge library. I settled with that option in that beautiful room with lots of excellent books to choose from. According to Edgar, a number of important people had slept in this room, and I would most certainly feel their vibrations. Malek told me I should feel privileged about this while we ate a very light dinner of chicken soup and a roll. I was grateful for their generosity and kindness. I pondered upon this wisdom. We are the reflection of what we have been. We are also what we are going to be. People certainly do not change with their stubborn natures as they mature, and so I decided never again to dwell on telling them my side of the story, for everything I attempted to explain was like talking to thin air. However, what happened to me when trying to use that public telephone occupied my mind all night through, and a number of other issues kept intruding in my reverie. I did not sleep a wink. I had also recently developed yet another hernia due to unprecedented accidents, which had gradually become uncomfortable. Alas, almost all men are born with a certain weakness, and hernias can happen at any time in one's life. I needed to be very careful when carrying heavy loads. Furthermore, I thought that going to places like the Philippines could perhaps be beneficial to calm my mind and frayed nerves, at least for a short while. After arrival at Spencer Street station, I felt the need to have a light snack before boarding the airport bus, because I did not have my usual breakfast that morning. I had mixed feelings whether I was doing the right thing by this journey. Then again, construing yet another imaginary scene in my mind, I thought perhaps there was a desperate need on my part to have a break from everyday concerns. Pondering not only about my own personal traumas, but everybody else's as well, I visualized that this mini-adventure could open up some brand new vistas for me. Also, discovering about other cultures could be very refreshing. So thinking, I packed my thoughts and fantasies in an imagined bundle and arrived at Tullamarine Airport. I was in a very chatty mood. I had to smile and talk with people in the waiting area who were full of dreams, expectations, and a few concerns. I drew caricatures on small pieces of paper and gave them to people, Firstly, to those who appeared very worried, and children found them entertaining. The whole idea was to make their flight memorable. I was determined to document my experiences, e.g., my flight to Sydney and Manila, filming much of the experience and my impressions from start to conclusion. I was so excited to observe the magnificent clouds from above and the beauteous land below. I observed the sunrise while listening to the moaning of some people during the many hours of flight. I wondered why people popularly chose to complain about things instead of enjoying the sights. Maybe it was just another subject to ponder on in order to eliminate their fears of flying, or to pass the time with mostly irrelevant thoughts. Could it be an attempt to control their frustrations in the face of long delays? Strangely, safety and health issues appeared to remain unimportant as the flight progressed and people continued consuming lots of good food and watching utterly boring videos. The excitement of flying amongst the clouds and being delighted with the landscape and mighty ocean below, as observed by the enthused passengers through the tiny windows, was a phenomenon to behold, and the children usually enjoyed the whole experiment better, if not inflicted, with adults' fears. However, because of their fears, many tend to enjoy flying like the birds in the sky only in their fantasies. Some people I have known have often declared the delights of flying free in their dreams. Thankfully, the young seem to enjoy actual flight more. But on a beautiful flight like this, some folks seem to freeze in fear of heights. Many therefore prefer to close their shutters, probably wanting to watch a video or two, even ones they might have seen a dozen times before, just to pass the time. There were others who preferred to calm their nerves by listening, reading, or drinking. I belong to a group of people who like to enjoy life, no matter under what circumstance and in what form. I thoroughly enjoy flying. When I was a child, I was convinced that I could participate in flying, even traveling into space, to the planets and the moon. After their multifaceted dreams and fantasies, many learned men and women were prophesying scientifically that mankind was to travel into space within this generation. Many decades later, nothing was done about it, other than a few attempts to listen to other intelligences and landing men on the moon, just to abandon the experience in order to have enough riches to conduct their wars. Like many other children growing up within this generation, I was gravely disappointed. Humanity had certainly progressed in many ways throughout the decades, but their religious intolerances, enmity, separations, and hatred towards each other had also equally advanced. Like in the olden days, they had many religious wars and regrettable racial discriminations. Some religious leaders kept making suggestions that the heavens belonged to a gracious God, and therefore we should leave heaven or space-related matters to God and never sin by going into space or to the moon. Yet they were the same leaders who blessed man's wars, portraying them as God's will. What I have discovered is that as long as any religious ideal is being followed blindly, there can never be any peace or advancement. Man's religions have slowed their progress to a deadly stop. I still ask, will there be any unity and peace in man's world? Will they ever learn how their war efforts have negatively influenced the lives of millions of people? What we have discovered shows us the effects of man's religious beliefs. When incorporated in worldwide politics, they have ruined their lives, their progression, and their world. Those who dared to speak of this were laughed at, ridiculed, and even persecuted in some parts of the world. The religions of men assist them to live more in fear now than ever before, with an uncertain future. Fortunately, some members of the human race still have the wisdom and progressive sciences which can unite the people of Earth without discrimination. It is never too late. When people can begin accepting one another like our little ones do, unless they are completely preempted through religious darkness and indoctrination, perhaps then humankind may start seeing the light as it was meant to be. Drifting in these deep thoughts and enjoying the flight, as always, while wishing it never ended, I glanced out of the window. When finally over the Philippines, like many others before me, I could only admire the scenery, the beauty and glory stretching far and wide from that vantage point. One area caught my attention briefly. What I observed was like a beautiful earth goddess lying upon the oceans for her beauty sleep under the warm rays of the sun. She was certainly in the nude. One could see a few rounded hills rising up towards the sky like female breasts. Some things are better seen from the air. The greens of the islands were also so different from this distance in the misty air, and one could discern the difference when comparing it with other parts of the world from a plane. Alas, this journey had to come to an end, and we descended gradually after circling the city of Manila several times. This worried me somewhat, for we have not been enlightened by the crew why there was a need to circle the city so often. During this time, I made use of the opportunity and filmed the capital from above. I kept running my camera during the landing, which was a sudden and sharp impact, followed by the plane tilting on its side so that the tip of the wing was digging into the paddock where we stopped. I could see a few people I assumed to be farmers running away from where we landed. We were told to exit in an orderly fashion and that there was no danger. We were led to shuttle buses, while some were taken into ambulances, or to the waiting area in the airport. There was not a single word about what had just happened, making me wonder if this kind of landing was normal. It was unusual and quite concerning. We were led to the luggage collection point and the customs area, where airport officials verified our information. The well-packed frozen meat from Australia was considered a great idea, and they were so happy for someone assisting people who perhaps could not afford to buy meat in Manila, for it was extremely expensive. The cereals I brought with me were also appreciated as a great help for needy Philippine children. I certainly did not expect a reception of this kind, but was happy. Soon after, I met with Robert, Edita, and her brother Tony, who helped me pack the luggage and other items I had brought into his four-wheel drive. As we passed through the streets of this well-established large city, one could see how grey and black the entire metropolis looked. I noticed that many old American army vehicles and jeeps had been modified for local usage and were very colorfully decorated with flashing colored lights all around them. Tony explained that they were used like taxi services all over the country, but Westerners would find it hard to squeeze into them, for they were taller than many locals, as I was soon to discover this for myself. There were also many bicycles with a small covered compartment at the back to carry people short distances, and several were waiting in groups to assist locals or tourists. Like the decorated army vehicles, they had lots of artistic graffiti, and Tony told me the story behind them and they were known as jeepneys. There were lots of people running frantically to and fro in almost every street, while the traffic was moving very fast in some parts and extremely slow in others. Soldiers were everywhere with their machine guns, even ready to stop any kind of aggression. I was told that seeing soldiers everywhere was normal. They were seen as protectors of people, and security officers at shopping centers, as could also be seen around walled and closed communities. There were so many vehicles, cars, trucks, and lots of buses. Some of the buses had open tops filled with people, holding a tissue over their faces. This was also evident with almost everybody walking on the streets. It was explained that people had to protect themselves against breathing problems, as the air was extremely polluted with diesel fumes. When people removed their handkerchiefs, one could see how the unprotected parts of their faces were blackened by the fumes. In fact, almost always the air smelt of being laden with burnt diesel. By way of background, the Philippines is an island country in the southwest Pacific Ocean. It is covered with thick jungles and green plains, rugged mountains rising above them. More than 7,000 tropical islands are included here. About 90% of the beautifully brown-skinned Filipinos are of Christian origin. The country is one of the primary producers of coconuts and sugar in the world. Great mahogany forests are also found here, and the waters around the islands are a large source of fish. According to archival information, the Spanish controlled the Philippines from the 1500s and ruled over them as a colony until 1898. It is therefore no wonder that many Filipinos look more Spanish than Malay or Asian. Then the United States took over under the terms of a treaty which ended the Spanish-American War. During 1942, Japan occupied the country. However, soon after, the United States regained control of the Philippines in 1945, but it became an independent republic in July 1946. The Philippines lies north of the equator and stretches 1,854 kilometers from north to south. The islands face the Luzon Strait in the north, Philippine Sea in the east, and Celebes Sea in the south. The Sulu Sea lies southwest of the islands, and the South China Sea lies to the west. The country contains three main island groups. Luzon in the north consists of Luzon, Mindoro, and a few other close islands. Visayan includes Bohol, Cebu, Leyte, Mastabi, Negros, Palawan, Panay, Samar, and a few other small islands in central Philippines. Mindanao consists of Mindanao and the other islands of the Sulu archipelago. Tony was more than willing to talk to me about Filipino race, and I had a few questions. It was important to discover a few facts. Most Filipinos belong to the Filipino-Malaysian race, and their ancestors are claimed to have come from Southeast Asia via the East Indies from circa 200 BC. Pure-blooded Filipinos have light brown skin, straight black hair, flat noses, and short, slender bodies. Christian Filipinos can be found throughout the country. Muslims live mainly in Mindanao and the islands of the Sulu archipelago, and the Spanish call them Moros or Moors. There are also pagan Filipinos who make up several tribes in the mountains of Luzon. Malay natives are known as Igorot, and their language is a form of Indonesian and is also known as Igorot. During Spanish control, many mixed marriages were said to have been the cause of a more Hispanic-looking race. However, the Chinese make up the second largest racial group. There are also small groups of mestizos, a mixed blend of whites of American or European ancestry. Interestingly, many of the country's important leaders and achievers have been mestizos. Descendants of the first people are known as negritos and are known to have migrated to the islands before 5000 BC. They belong to the Pygmies, and their size is extremely small. They look completely different to other Filipinos. During the 1970s, a very small number of Stone Age people were discovered living in caves on Mindanao and are known as Tasadais. And the area they live in was declared a protected reserve. It is important to note that more than 4/5 of Filipinos belong to the Roman Catholic Church, and their conversion to Christianity goes back more than 400 years. What Tony explained was noteworthy in regard to the Church in the Philippines. Having left the Catholic Church in 1902, Bishop Gregorio Aglipay founded the Philippine Independent Church. The only difference one can discern is that they do not recognize the Pope as an authority, and there are also other religious groups. The people speak 9 different languages of the Malayo-Polynesian family, and they are further divided into at least 90 local and tribal dialects. Many also speak English and Spanish. In fact, Tagalog, English, and Spanish are the main spoken languages. Family units are exactly the same as in any Western country around the world. There are about 21 large cities in the Philippines, the largest of which is Manila. They are modern, with very European-looking buildings and cathedrals. Most of the farmers live in barrio, or small village. Many also live along the country roads and hillsides. In every village there is a stone church, next to which stands the home of a Catholic priest, for priests have great influence on the lives of villagers. Tony was really excited meeting me. By all accounts, he thought Edita had finally found the right man to settle down with. According to what he was told, her new friend was a very honest and decent person. He certainly was not wrong, and obviously very cognizant about his sister's characteristics. What I understood from Tony was that Edita had told him her new friend Suren was of good Catholic faith and very spiritual. I prefer to remain silent about this issue, knowing how religious and at times extremely superstitious Filipinos could be. Although Tony was a well-educated person, he was extremely sensitive about his faith. It was better not to say much about my own personal research and discoveries in regard to any belief systems. However, since I was introduced as a psychic by his sister, there was need to explain some home truths. The word psychic could not be applied to what I was popularly described as a fortune-teller and nothing else. That was completely opposite to me, for I never claimed to be a fortune-teller, and it was a very ignorant assessment. However, I am not going to deny certain qualities about myself. For instance, I have a tendency to imagine and use it to create art, including science fantasy. I have developed a sense of reading people's behavior patterns accurately as if speaking a different language, which helped me enormously when psychoanalyzing others with the aim of helping them when there was need. As a result of my analysis of individuals' personality trends, I could predict possible outcomes resulting from continued actions on the part of the person I was talking to. My conclusions were not based upon made-up stories and ungrounded guesses like some psychics. There are many people in today's world desperate to hear something nice about a good future, and their vulnerability could be used to benefit those selling nothing other than shadows. I believe in absolute truthfulness and honesty, unlike what some cultists and those of extreme fanaticism would like to promote. They are also the type of people who prefer to put themselves on the top of a pedestal to be worshipped, or present their organizations as God's only chosen. There are those who do not desire to lose their seat of importance, and so need to downgrade any other thought or person with the aim of creating more worshippers. Unfortunately, there are so many innocent people sucked into such darkness, believing they are illuminated by what they have been force-fed, often feeling having the divine right to condemn and judge others who are different. Editha was also subjected to a number of confused viewpoints of dogma, such as the beliefs of Jehovah's Witnesses, but she was clever enough to consider a few other options. Despite all that, she judged me not according to my profession, but according to my personal appearance. This was a minor problem of no great significance, and could be dealt with. Furthermore, as mentioned, Editha's educational background was apparently supreme when compared to everybody else's, according to her own words and behavior. In other words, others could not be better educated than her. This attitude alone told me more than what she might have realized. However, since I considered her as a friend, I decided to ignore her forthrightness at the time, for everybody has their shortcomings, and some people choose to live with their dreams. We passed through a guarded entrance with soldiers, machine guns, on their shoulders, but very friendly and smiling. It was certainly an interesting experience to observe a guarded community as if one was entering a different country, complete with border control, traversing on a very clean road amidst the gorgeous houses of the well-off, with colorful tropical flowers in vases made of unused car tires in front of them. The whole scenery looked out of this world. When finally arriving at his family home, their servants collected our belongings and food from Australia, taking them indoors. Tony told me that in the Philippines, the servants worked hard to make life easy for us and our guests, and this way we could concentrate on more important things of life. This, he said, is how we are providing jobs for the unemployed. That sounded logical, and the servants looked happy to be employed the way they were. It was a lifestyle I needed to get used to very quickly. As we passed through the lobby area, there was an average-sized grotto with a figure of Mother Mary, in front of which he knelt down, uttered a short prayer of thanks, and made the sign of the cross, as many Christians do all over the world. Editha did the same. Obviously, they were following a tradition like those in Latin America and in parts of Europe. As they entered the main hall, I purposely slowed, staying by the statue for a short while, thus creating the impression that I respected their values. But, in truth, standing in front of a statue like this was due to my interest in beautiful works of art. His wife, relatives, and maidservants greeted me with utmost respect as if a king was visiting them, and this made me wonder about their traditional values still further. They were extremely friendly, and that was certainly a beautiful reception I could not easily forget. It was also very unusual for me to see how those servants were ever ready to take orders. As we settled around the heavy ornamental mahogany table, he told me, "If you need any help, I mean anything, ask the servants, and they will drop everything just to serve you with what you ask them for. All I needed to do was to call them by their names, clap my hands, or ring the bell. In fact, I could ask them any favors I wanted, even if they were asleep. This was their duty and their tradition, and they were rewarded for that." They were preparing for a traditional Filipino feast, but there was a slight delay due to a brownout. Their electricity system often did not generate enough power or broke down. In those days, the situation was common. In fact, electric power was not available in all parts of the Philippines, and the people lived with gas lamps, candles, and battery-powered lighting. The tropical heat wave, and about 35–40 degrees Celsius with high humidity, was not ideal. But I was told one could quickly get used to it and become acclimatized. At night, however, I could use the large fan to cool down. Their electricity system was based on the American 110 volts at 60 cycles, just like the television and video systems, which were also American NTSC, and I had no problem charging the batteries for my camera. I believe Tony, just like Edita, attended Santo Tomas University and was also extremely devoted to the Christian belief. Apart from his absolute respect in front of his grotto, as with almost all Filipino homes I observed, Sunday mornings were reserved for a family outing to the nearby Catholic church, and I was invited. He was very excited, explaining to me all about the architectural excellence and history of the cathedrals. He was extremely friendly and happy talking to me, also respectful, unlike his sister, fully accepting my professional qualifications. He told me that Edita had developed a false sense of personal pride, probably to escape the reality of things she might have previously experienced. I made mention of my interest in discovering the truth in regard to Filipino faith healers, and they decided to share some of the experiences. Both Tony and Edita wanted to visit the congregation of a certain Christian sister from a Catholic order who presided over a church she occupied with her helpers. They were apparently conducting faith healing services. Tony explained there was also somewhere else on the rugged terrain nearby where the Madonna made appearances to multitudes of pilgrims from time to time, and there were many photographs to prove it. Apparently a source of water was created by a miracle, and pilgrims went there to collect some of that wonderfully blessed water, which they used to help themselves heal from all kinds of disease and discomfort. Maybe we were going to experience that miracle when there, and this was where we could buy lots of souvenirs. In addition, they wanted me to see the homes and statues which cried oil. It was so holy that people applying it on the inflicted parts of their bodies were always healed. Even those statues, framed paintings, and large photographs which cried blood could be a major blessing to believers. It seemed that I had a wonderful opportunity to study some of those human trends while visiting this interesting country, rich with its traditions, and I hoped to collect samples to test in a laboratory. Later, I was invited to give a talk to students at a higher education school and their teachers on one of the islands, as well as visiting Bacolod, where we could directly experience the ash-laden streets and shops, discovering how people coped with the situation after Mount Pinatubo had erupted. This meant that we needed to take several boat trips for long hours, but considering the flat-bottom boats were from the war years and were mostly of Japanese origin, it created some concern, especially the way they were used as passenger vehicles. To begin with, their safety measures were lacking and were usually loaded with too many people and their wares above the recommended weight limits. There had been several boat accidents, and many people had lost their lives at sea. However, there was still much excitement in the air, and I intended to capture the adventure on my video. Tony loved good and traditional food. His young son, whom they all called JP, occasionally went to shopping centers, cinemas, and interesting landmarks with me. Shortly before my return home, we went to see Aladdin, an animated blockbuster in the city. As mentioned, Manila was an extremely crowded and controversial place. When one ventured out from Makati, the gated and protected community of the wealthy Filipinos, where Tony and his family lived, after only a very short trip, and being greeted by the soldiers, one found one's self amidst bicycle riders, using their vehicles like a mini-taxi service, trying to make a buck by taking 1 or 2 passengers to their destinations or to the jeepney stations. This is also where one finds extraordinary numbers of people pushing each other to get into those vehicles first. The experience can be very chaotic for the very first-time traveler, especially when one is among the ardent pressure of salespeople, particularly targeting tourists and other crowds. It certainly looked amusing to be someone towering tall within a huge gathering of slender and very short people in their thousands. Nobody could ever miss you. When you entered one of those colorfully decorated vehicles, at the back you needed to fold yourself forward to fit in among the passengers comfortably seated therein, chatting loudly with each other. Their voices could be very loud in your ears when they yelled to each other in their own dialects. But you can rest assured that you will be feasting on the friendly smiles of locals. However, watch out for your valuables. When you travel in your air-conditioned vehicle, you hardly notice how hard it may be to commute for students and working people. When traveling on public transport, however, you become aware of the air quality. It is very difficult to breathe because of the diesel-laden fumes, unless you have a mask or cover your face with a handkerchief. As mentioned, the streets are very long and unusually wide, with very heavy traffic of cars, buses, large lorries, and army vehicles sharing the roads, with crowds of people and bicycles. The wide streets accommodate extremely heavy traffic, upon which long delays can be expected, and they are lined with small markets, modern and ancient office buildings, churches and cathedrals. Many of those grade and soot-covered buildings are tall, reaching up into the skies. There are many parks and museums spread throughout the metropolis. Shopping centers, cinemas, and large department stores are well protected by armed officers. One can find everything American, from clothing to electronic equipment and food items. One discovers the locals speaking or pretending to speak perfect American, and many radio stations air their daily programs in that language. Eateries from Kentucky Fried Chicken to McDonald's family restaurants seem to be very popular, and American food is more appreciated by the young. However, a bowl of rice instead of the usual rolls makes a nice change. When you attempt to consume rice, like the locals do, you might be asked in amazement, "So, you like our food? Do you have rice in your country also?" I found rice to be a welcome alternative and, interestingly, surprised a few Filipinos in the process. It was certainly very unusual to be asked something like this of someone who grew up in Europe, where one also consumes rice dishes, but I resolved, just for the fun of it, to pretend as if eating rice was a very first-time experience when frequenting Filipino restaurants. Tony, his family, and Edita were keen talking to me about the latest American Filipino fashion and trends, whereas his young son, J.P., was happy talking of the latest music trends, audio and video industry, and films. He often hummed some of the musical expressions from recently released films. He wanted to see Aladdin with me when I was back in Manila after visiting their relatives and friends. As I mentioned before, Sunday mornings were mostly reserved for going to a church or cathedral and listening to long sermons by the clergy on good morals and Jesus' teachings. I had no choice other than play the role of a tourist and go along with it. However, I felt more at ease when Tony and I spoke on culturally significant subjects, the traditions of Filipinos, and food. He was keenly interested in importing seeds of long-lasting and easily growing varieties of Australian native trees, believing they would flourish in a Filipino soil, and it could become a viable industry. The first days of my visit were very exciting, as expected, and became even more interesting during the rest of my journey. Tony's interest in ancient buildings around the world created the beneficial academic and intellectual atmosphere I personally enjoyed. After some traditional shopping in one of the marketplaces, I was to discover the railway system, running through the city, lined completely by the shanty housing of the poor, and it was very sad to see their living standards. We were warned never to attempt poking our hands and arms out of the trains, as some people lost their personal belongings, their fingers, and even had their hands cut off by the poor lining the sides of the rails. We were told never to attempt to venture out into those areas of shanty townships unless one carried a wooden cross around one's neck, for people usually respected priests and holy men. When questioned about what had been done so far by the authorities to eliminate poverty, one usually met with complete silence. Neither Tony, Edita, nor anybody else made mention of anything, completely ignoring the issue as if it never existed. I realized I was obviously touching on a most sensitive area, which they preferred to ignore, and decided not to seek answers in regard to this ill anymore. That evening we made some plans about how to spend the rest of our holidaying with them in the best possible way. Edita was intending to go back to Melbourne soon, for Robert had to start school after his holiday, and she had apparently promised to be back at work, but I could stay with Tony and his family a while longer. However, Edita wanted to get a large sum of money from me, as she had very little left after spending huge amounts. The next morning she left with the money she took from my wallet, leaving only a note that she was going to return it to me during the next few days. I was in shock, and so was Tony. I wondered how one could survive until she transferred money to my account. Tony was expected to pay for my expenses until the money was finally made available, as Edita most reluctantly and unwillingly put it. She was clearly under pressure from her brother to return it. Her reluctance was due to me allegedly owing her money, and Tony was not too happy about her light-fingeredness. When I went to Pangasinan with Tony and his son to visit their mother, the poor woman was almost crying and saying her daughter was such an intelligent girl, but for some reason men were so unreliable and did not stay with her after taking advantage of her, like Gus, her former husband, and probably I was the same. I was utterly shocked by this, because I was certainly not her husband, or intending to start a family with Edita, and much of her behavior was completely against me and my interests. On Tony's recommendation, we decided to risk long boat trips to other islands, visiting cities like Baguio to see their other friends and relatives. The boats we traveled on were overloaded with people, their wares and animals, even their hens used for fighting. Seeing me filming, some of them were not happy and very unfriendly, probably thinking that I was one of those Westerners opposing animal cruelty. When I was discreetly warned about it, I became very cautious around those fierce-looking people, for they looked as if they could throw me overboard. Besides, many crates used as their outdoor bedding did not look exciting enough to capture on film, and again I was warned that people touching them could be extremely flea-covered by journey's end. On the other hand, some locals were very protective and extremely cautious about their livestock. We heard the personal stories of people about those old and converted boats having sunk, and many travelers drowned. No wonder Tony, a devout Catholic, was constantly praying during those trips, asking to be protected while we remained in our cabin. Father and son were continually making the sign of the cross. I simply remained an observer and suggested that, being a Westerner, I was not fully cognizant with their traditions, but that I also shared their concerns. Tony repeatedly said, "Hope you don't mind me praying all the time. It makes me feel calm and a bit more confident that we are protected. Since he is our protector, we must trust Jesus, our Lord." you.